As I sort of indicated before, Neil was chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Group when we did our first inquiry into sustainability. And he has had promotion thrust upon him, and in fact by his peers, which is always the nicest way. He was actually elected by the MPs to become the chairman of the DEFRA Select Committee. Prior to that, he'd been, with the Conservatives, we have what are called backbench committees on things, and he'd been chairman of that before. But even more importantly, I'm not sure quite what CV you've had about Neil, but he was actually a proper dairy farmer. Hooray, hooray. So again, guys, not only have you got a government that's listening, but you've actually got people that know what the bloody hell they're doing. So the fact that he's got out is beside the point. Well, that's it. He absolutely diversified. I've met his wife, and it was a good idea. Yeah. What we're going to do today is have a little bit of a conversation about whether it would be a good idea or a bad idea to actually get out of Europe, or stay in, indeed. Bit of a hint there, guys, which way I'm coming from. And what I'd like to do before we start is please, please, please help me out here. And don't do 2 hands. And if you're from Lincolnshire, don't do 3 hands. Can we please have a show of hands, first and foremost, who thinks, before they've heard a word, before they've read anything, that we ought to get out of Europe? Right, so my maths is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So that's, out is 11. And who wants to stay in Europe? Oh, I don't know. Yeah, what do you reckon?
A lot more.
60? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, we'll call it 60. In. And anybody who is undecided?
Yeah, a few.
Right, okay. That's 15 maybe? Okay, right. Undecided, cannot spell. 15. Okay, right, that's great, because the people that are organising this brilliant day suggested it might be quite fun to do the hands up before we started, and then perhaps at the end of it also do a hands up. So, Neil, you're going to kick off why we need to stay in Europe. Dear boy.
Okay, well, thank you, Heather, very much. And like I said, perhaps we can do this like a parliamentary debate. We can intervene on each other if we want to during the debate. I mean, I was brought up in Young Farmers, and I started my public speaking with Brains Trust. And of course, Brains Trust, the second speaker, you always oppose what the first speaker said, irrespective of whether you agree with it or not. And so being in Parliament, I can argue black is white and white is black. So today, not having an opponent shouldn't be a problem, because I should be able to create my own opposition. Always nice to follow Sean, because one might almost feel like a sort of warm person, mightn't one? But I'm only teasing Sean, and he knows that, because we get on extremely well. But what Sean does do is he gives you an absolutely realistic position of where it is, and there isn't the sort of, I want to see as many dairy farmers survive who can survive and want to survive, but Sean's giving very much an economic, an economist view, where the largest farms should have the greatest scales of economy and should survive best. But there are all sorts of, family situations which can be quite different. So just a very quick potted history of me is that I was born, like I said, as a dairy onto a dairy farm, sat in what was in those days in over the crib while my parents milked cows in a cow stall, and they were the Channel Islands, and we used to let the milk stand overnight, and we used to take the top of the milk off and have that for breakfast. So the amount of cholesterol we were having at that stage must have been quite interesting. I'm still here. It doesn't seem to have done me a lot of harm, but we won't go there. But so then I went on to become my own farming, and then went into Frisians, and I milked then for some 20 odd years. In those days, you had the Milk Marketing Board, and then, of course, you moved from the Milk Marketing Board, that we then moved to Milk Mark, and so on. And so that brings me, and then, of course, during my political career, I started off as a parish district county councillor. Then I put my hat into the ring for the European Parliament, not expecting to get elected. In 1999, I was elected, sat on the Agriculture Committee of the European Parliament for 10 years, and the last two and a half years that I was there, I actually chaired that Agriculture Committee with 27 countries as it was then, now 28 with Croatia. And you know what Winston Churchill said, it's difficult to please all of the people all of the time. It was certainly difficult to please 27 countries any of the time. But it was a very, very interesting place to be. And that sort of leads me sort of neatly really into why I think, and I'm not really, we can open the debate, and I want you to be sort of ask us plenty of questions in a minute, and let's have the debate from the floor as well. I can open it widely to, what we think of Europe and where we should be, but I think I want to really concentrate this morning on agriculture and why I don't think it would be an advantage for those of you that are in farming and in agriculture actually to leave the EU. Because if you look at the history of the Common Agricultural Policy, you started with the fact that you're coming out of the war, you were looking for food, and so basically you subsidized food. And you subsidized it, and you kept subsidizing it until you got to a stage by the early 80s when you had too much food in Europe anyway. And so therefore then in came milk quotas. I spent quite a lot of my dairy time actually having a decent price for my milk, but actually having to spend perhaps 5, 10, even 15 pence a litre sometimes to actually lease in the quota for the pleasure of actually producing that milk. And so all those things we've come through. And yes, I would have really hated what Europe did at that time. But we've actually moved on. And we've moved on from a milk marketing board where we were guaranteed a price. So what you did, it wasn't perhaps the best of prices, but you actually kept a few more cows, you increased your production because you had a guaranteed price. You didn't really worry where your milk was going. That didn't matter. You produced the milk and you got on with it. So we moved on through that as the CAP gradually brought in milk quotas. Then we saw the end of the milk marketing board. Then we saw the coming of Milk Mark. And then it became marketing of milk, and actually where our milk was going became much more important. And really, OMSCO, in a way, you were sort of born into a period where you had very tough marketing conditions, where you actually saw, organic milk price overproduction, and you saw that price dramatically drop. You then went out into the marketplace in order to export that milk and actually drive the price up. And I mean, I've always been a simple economist, or amateur one with Sean here. I better not say an economist, had I? But in as much that if you want to keep a good price at home, if you can export enough of your product so that the market at home is tight, then you will get a better price. At the moment, we're trying to drive that price up in a market which is saturated, and that is the problem. And I think actually farmers and some of the demonstrations, I haven't actually taken part with them, but they have done some good in limited pockets, and it all helps. This is where, Sean says, we mustn't do that, but I don't know. It doesn't hurt, because like I said, I think there are people out there prepared to actually give a little bit more for their food. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Morrison's and their system of actually people actually paying 10 pence a litre extra for that particular milk, and it'll be interesting to see how much they actually sell, because many of you will probably know that the NFU did a survey some years ago about people going into a supermarket. They were going to buy the best and the local and all the rest of it, and when they came out they bought the cheapest. 95% had bought the cheapest in the shop. Now they might have changed, but let's not do it. So if you then take that argument that we've got a market, we've got a single market, we've got a European Union. Now, what would be the difference in the market? What would be the difference in the market if we came out of the EU tomorrow? Would we suddenly become Fortress Britain? I don't think we would. We're actually a free trading nation. In fact, most of the arguments about Europe is that it's too restrictive for Britain. So therefore, we would become possibly an even more open trading nation. So do you mean to tell me we're not going to accept milk from Holland, from Denmark, from Germany? We're not going to have yogurts in. I think we could do with a lot less, don't get me wrong, and we want to have more of our own. But just look at the market. It is there, and it will come in. And we will need to export still into that market, as well as into China and further. So with the CAP now is that quotas have actually gone, right, or they're about to go. Now, at the moment, you're all saying perhaps it's the wrong time for them to go. But I argued for the 10 years that I was in the EU, for God's sake, get rid of quotas, because the trouble is, if there's an increase in global trade in the world, Britain or Europe can't actually take advantage of it. Now, that is the situation where we will be, and there will be an upturn. I mean, let's be positive today. I know most of you, when you see your milk checks coming in, and others, you very difficult to be positive at the moment. But it will get better, and we will need to produce more milk into the future. And we will get on top of TB, and we will stamp out that disease not only in the cattle, but in the badgers as well. But don't let me be as controversial as Sean this morning. But you take that in the round, you've got that market, you've got your production, and you know what you're going to do with it. You're going out to sell it. So therefore, you will then come out of Europe then, and you won't have the single farm payment, okay? Now, the single farm payment may or may not be essential to you, but if you actually look at the profitability of agriculture overall, you actually see that's largely probably the amount of profit we actually make overall. Now, with the dairy industry, probably the single farm payment is important, but of course there's huge investments beyond that. It's probably the more extensive farmer that actually is more completely, needs the single farm payment even more. But you see, Sean is absolutely right about those European farmers. They are all small, a lot of them. Not necessarily our major competitors in the Netherlands and Ireland and Germany, but and Denmark, but a lot of them are very small. But they will be carrying on. If we come out of the EU, that's not going to stop the rest of Europe subsidizing agriculture. In fact, they'll probably subsidize even more without us being there. And when that agriculture is subsidized, that production will come into Britain unless we actually say it's not going to come. And I haven't heard any of the major parties actually say it's Fortress Britain. And so therefore, if it's not Fortress Britain, then be careful when you make that decision in that referendum vote as to what you vote for. Because I actually think all you'll vote for if you vote to get out of the EU is, yes, you won't have a single farm payment anymore, but you will not get those, you will still have the same markets that you will be dealing with, and you will have to deal with them so very, very carefully. So that will be my final point to you would be that I think that it's right that from a farming point of view, that we actually stay in the EU, we actually see it reformed, we actually see that we get much more flexibility in our agricultural policy, but the idea of coming out, all regulation will disappear and we will be able to do exactly what we want. No, we won't, because we will trade with all our commodities, with food safety, with everything, with animal welfare, everything that there's going to be huge pressures, so you will need to carry on the same. So I would not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to let's have some controversial ideas or whatever you might throw at us.
Thank you very much, Neil, indeed. Well, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to tell you why you must take a view and vote out in the referendum. And the reason why I'm going to do that, bearing in mind that this is a hypothetical conversation, because I've actually got a government appointment, and so the whips are going to kill me later. So I don't know who's taping this, or how many journalists are in the room, but this is a hypothetical point of view if the whips are listening, all right? So why you need to get out of Europe is because you are actually producing the best there is in the world. I think that the dairy industry, and particularly the organic dairy industry in this country, has the positive future that means you are not only in a niche market now, but you are in a niche market which has over extra profit for you in every single country that you can export to. When Liz Truss, the new DEFRA Secretary of State, went over to China, she specifically went there to sell your products. That was the point of the visit. And the outcome of the visit was, notwithstanding the overall drop in consumption by China because of, goodness me, their expansion has gone from 11% to 6.5% increase in GDP every year. Wouldn't every country like a 6.5% increase in GDP? Your products are now selling there like they have never sold before. I don't think you want to be afraid of saying to Europe, you are a corrupt, useless, out-of-date model, and bearing in mind this is a hypothetical conversation, Whips, all right? You are a corrupt, out-of-date, useless model that has vested interests that are not your interests. And that's why I think you should be proud, you should label up what you do, even more to the extent than you do, and I think that you have the brightest future going. I love the fact that Neil is an old mate of mine. I love the fact that he was chairman of a European Select Committee at the time. My goodness me, doesn't that tell you everything where he's coming from? And the fact that he's not dairy farming anymore, but that's absolutely fine. So I think that actually you are now the masters of your own destiny. I think that Europe will be crying out for your product. I think that when we have that final referendum vote, because there will be terms negotiated by the most marvellous Prime Minister that there is, Rips, are you listening? The important thing is, whatever those red lines are, whatever the negotiations that come back, if it doesn't mean the best deal for British dairy farmers, vote no. Vote to get out. You are the best in the world. You will be taking over from what New Zealand are doing. You will be taking over from what Australia has been doing. You will be taking over from what Ireland is doing. I think Europe will want your products. You are a niche market with an extra over premium, and you should be proud of what you do. And if the red lines are not enough, vote no. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Well done, Heather.
Now, guys, there are people with microphones, but it's getting towards the witching hour of your coffee. Is there anybody that wants a very, very quick couple of questions? We're happy to take those.
Yeah,
who's going to wander around with the mics? Or would you kindly stand up and shout?
Hi, I'm Dan Leonard. I'm a veterinary surgeon from the Northwest. The government took a major misstep in '97 in terms of TB control when it should have read the Krebs report properly and made the correct decisions on the wildlife situation of TB. And if you look at a multi-decade history from that point forward, you'll see a pretty straight line upwards epidemic of TB across this country, slowly radiating out from those original hotspots. Given that the government, okay, they've got a 25-year strategy, which realistically is just a piece of paper, and they're not actually implementing one of the most important elements of that control, I'd be really interested to know, we're talking a lot about exports here, in Europe and the wider world, and especially Neil's history. I'd like to know, where are we in terms of risk of our exports, and what are the costs if this strategy isn't rolled out, and if we fail? Could you give us a feel for how that might impact?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to persuade me with the necessity of what we have to do. And when there's a debate on the need to cull badgers in Parliament, I'm the one that's wheeled out among Heather and others to hold the line and fight the line. You only have to look at what's happened in the Republic of Ireland in the last 10 years. They've actually culled badgers. They've had virtually the same cattle movement restrictions and testing as we've had, and they've actually halved their amount of TB, whereas ours is going up all the time. Now, I have got the assurances from Liz Truss that we've got one more cull area being rolled out this year in Dorset, but that we will significantly increase that, because, I mean, you've got to really get to a situation of almost county by county culls now if we're going to really stop it spreading. And I think if only we could get to people and say to them, look, if you take your cattle and you take out all the infected animals, and then you put those clean animals out in that field where there are badgers carrying bovine TB, they are going to reinfect those cattle. Is it logical just to take out the cattle and not actually clean the badgers as well? And I think I actually think the public are beginning to come around to it. Now, you'll always have those, you've got those of us who are within the industry who are absolutely convinced and certainly also the information coming out of Somerset and Gloucester, and Somerset in particular, in West Somerset, is the figures on the number of cattle actually with TB in those cull areas has dropped significantly. I mean by something like 2/3. So, you're talking about significant numbers. So hopefully, as another year goes by, those figures can start to be released. And you're right about the Krebs trials. They were never, ever properly analysed. And of course, don't forget, it became very political in the end. And while Hilary Benn almost got to the situation where, and I think perhaps in fairness to Hugh Ranker-Davies and one or two others in the Labour Party, they might have actually gone for the cull, but there were enough there behind them to stop it actually happening. And I think, you know, it would be criminal now if we don't actually get on and do the job. Oh yeah, I mean, there is a risk there. It's a bit like BSE. It's all those issues where unless you are seen to actually control that disease, then eventually, if you're not careful, it becomes a risk to our exports. And you're absolutely right. Now, I don't think we are there because we are actually tackling it and we are seen to tackle it. But if we walked away from it and we didn't get those TB numbers down, then yes, you are absolutely right. And so therefore it is very much an issue.
Is there one more question? Because, okay,
Yeah.
Sir, would you like to stand up?
If we were to leave the EU, how would leaving the EU make it easier for us to seize the opportunity in China? What is it that's going to go away that'll make it easier outside than in?
I'll let Heather come back, but I wanted to have a go at Heather on that one because she made much, quite rightly, of Liz Truss and other ministers going and the Prime Minister going to China and promoting our food, but they're doing it now, and we're in the EU. So, you know, what is the difference? What is actually going to make the difference? And perhaps you want to answer this one, but what is going to make the difference? Why is it going to be different the moment we come out the EU? Why is it actually going to be easier? I mean, I think it's a great British product. We've got, don't get me wrong, and I think we should sell it and sell it and sell it, but it's not going to make it any easier to sell it if we're outside the EU rather than in.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, because then we're going to do the vote. And the reason why I'm going to persuade more than 11 of you to put your hands up next time is that the reason why it makes such a difference is that we cannot brand the stuff we're selling now as 100% UK. It is part of the European Union. What I want us to be proud about is the product that we sell, whether it's got the red tractor on it or whatever it is. It's our product. It's British, it's UK. And when we go and do a free trade agreement with all of the Commonwealth countries, when we do a free trade agreement and sort out particularly, I mean, obviously Canada and Commonwealth, but you know, with the USA as well, it makes such a difference that you are selling that product. I have never been so appalled in my life when BSE was going round first time round, and I was in a restaurant in France, and there was a handwritten note on the wall saying, "No beef in this restaurant has come from England." And I thought, why? That's appalling. That is appalling. I want us to go out there and have the best brand in the world. I know that's what you produce now. I know that's why you get up in the morning at 5 a stupid o'clock and do what you do. Because that's what you are proud about. You have the highest integrity of looking after your animals, the highest integrity of looking after your land. You want badgers sorting out. You want the squirrels that carry it as well sorting out. You want that to happen. And because we'll be able to put our own brand on it and be positive about what we're doing, about how we look after our animals, that is where you are going to get your premium and that is where you are going to get your exports. And because it'll be so brilliant across the whole of the world, you are going to get an even bigger market in this country too. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed.
Well done.
Sir, I regret time is against us.
That we can't put a Union Jack on product that we sell.
Absolutely we can't.
Because of the EU regulation.
Absolutely we can't. So, on that delightful note, can I now do the vote again, please? And I'm not going to get, I'm not going to get offended. I'm not going to come and smack you. Not often, not often. So, who now would like to say that come the decision day that they will vote to get out of Europe? Well, it hasn't gone down, has it, Neil? Please tell me that.
It hasn't gone up, though.
No, and so, who wants to stay in Europe? Yeah, all right. I give up, all right. The hypothetical conversation with the whips that I'm going to have a week on Monday is going to be delightful. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming today. I know you're going to be looked after by Lyndon a bit later on with chairing meetings. It's been an absolute privilege to be here. Sean has agreed to stay on and do the Q&A panel at 12:15. So thank you for coming. Have a brilliant day. Let's go and get some coffee.
Heather, before you sit down, can I just thank Heather for what she's done? Because I don't think many of you realise that if you are actually part of the government ministerial team, you have to toe a government line. I, as a DEFRA chairman, as a scrutineer, don't have to do that line. So you've been a great sport, and I shall explain to the whips exactly why you did it. And that should get you hung, drawn, and quartered at the very least. But anyway, thank you very much.
No,